In this video, we're using the Lagom P100 for filter brewing. Welcome, my name is Patrick Rolf and this is Coffee with April. For this episode, we're back with this grinder. And if you don't know what this is, then tune in on the video that we did last week where we basically talked about how we brew espresso with it. It's the new Lagom P100, or new. We actually don't know exactly when it was released, but fairly new. Made by Option O, which is an Australian company that we guess produce in China, most likely. And in last week's video, we basically looked into how do we brew espresso with it. And we were kind of happy with it. And what we want to do as well is to look into how do we brew filter coffee with it. Filter coffee is a big thing of what we do here at April. We obviously have our April brewers as well. So we're very curious to see what is the kind of result that comes out of it. And we've been testing it. One of the things that are interesting here is that you're able to adjust the RPM pretty much. So you can basically grind faster or slower. Now this is different from the automatic setting that this grinder already have, where it speeds up in the end of the grind to kind of push out all of the coffee. But apart from that, you can actually regulate from 1 to 9. So what we're doing in this video is that we did 3 different grinds on the same grind setting, 6.5, for a 12-gram dose with the April brewer and 200 grams of water. And what we've done is that we've grounded these coffees on 3 different RPMs. So with that, we're basically measuring particle size and distribution on every RPM to see what is the actual difference here. And then of course, we're gonna make a brew to see taste-wise what the difference is as well, right? Now, I wanna just say a little bit of a side note is that still this week, one of the challenges grinding-wise is that we do have most of the coffee coming out. It's basically zero retention, or at least as close to it as you can be from my own experience. However, you still have, when you tap this out, you have quite a lot of lumps. So like a little bit kind of a big ball of a clumpy, really small fine particle coffee that is coming out when you're doing it. And I think that that's perhaps suitable for espresso, maybe less suitable for filter. So that's something that we're gonna check now. But I'm gonna start the brew, walk you through it, and then go back to more details about the grinder. So the coffee that we're brewing is a natural process Sidra from the La Palma Tucán farm in Colombia. One of our kind of favorite and current limited lots that we're featuring. So as I said, we're doing a 12-gram dose. Using the April glass brewer to get a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more body out of this coffee, because it is a bit of a light floral coffee. The water temperature sits at 93 degrees, and we're gonna do our standard 100-100 pour. 50 gram circle, 50 gram center. And when you're brewing 3 like this, it's helpful to let the first one go until 15 seconds. Then you start the second one and so on. And then you basically just follow after that, right? So it's kind of easy. Now the grinder, as we said last week, is actually really easy to work with. And in terms of retention, it's really quite interesting. Now, one of the things that is also catching our attention is the fact that it is a 98 millimeter burr set, which makes it a really large burr set, which is something that in filter grinders is still quite rare today, right? So the question is always, how is that gonna taste, right? Because you can do a lot of measurements. All of these measurements are very much hobby science. They're all imperfect. Even though we're using proper tools to measure, without a proper sample mass, you can never really say anything for sure, right? So also the numbers we're gonna share here are indications more than anything. Obviously in a different setting with different tools, you'll probably get another result, right? But what has been interesting here is that when we grind these 3 different doses on the 3 different RPMs, is that the range is not massively different. Like what we see in general when you work with the RPM is that the total micron size is not going to change a lot when you're in the lower kind of range of speed. What you're gonna see is that your uniformity and your size is gonna change a lot the faster you go. So basically the working theory for most people is that a slower grind produces a more uniform grind size, which is true in the sense that it seems to eliminate a lot of the larger boulders that would come if you grind really fast. And that's basically the same thing that we have here. So the different RPM settings we have on, again, 6.5 on this grinder, we have 1, we have 3, and we have 6. And if we look at 1 and 3, the differences are actually not so big. The micron is fairly similar. We're around 680, 670. The biggest difference is that on the 1, we seem to have a lower portion of the kind of larger size. So every time you grind out, you always have a part of your distribution that is more than the other parts, right? So you always have a full range from small to larger particles. And in number 1, that kind of top or mid-range is actually a little bit lower, which would indicate it's a bit more uniform. But again, the difference in terms of particle distribution is not massive. But then if you look at number 6, here we're going to start seeing some really big differences. And the main reason based on our measurements is that we have a lot more larger particles. And these larger particles are pushing up the micron. So here we're above 700, closer to 720, which on the same grind size obviously is a big difference. And if you look at the particle distribution, the reason for this average seems to be the fact that we have a lot more larger particles, right? So this is kind of interesting, and they're all numbers, and numbers are interesting, but in the end of the day, if it doesn't translate to the cup profile, it doesn't really matter. So we're gonna let all of these brews go down, finish up, we're gonna taste them, and then we're gonna come back with a little bit more feedback about the grinder. So we're back after tasting and measuring, right? And it's a little bit interesting here. And before we move any further, keep in mind, these are just a very small sample selection that we've been measuring, right? Always when you do stuff like this or try to claim anything scientifically, then you have to have a lot more volume. That's just the reality of it. But in this kind of hobby science setup that we have here, the result is as follows. And this is kind of interesting. We see a clear difference in TDS, so basically in extraction. Definitely the speed of grinding has impacted what we can get out of the coffees, right? Which obviously then is also going to translate and change the perception in taste, acidity, balance, sweetness, mouthfeel, and so on, right? And what we see is that the slowest speed, so cup number 1, is actually then the cup that has extracted the higher. So we have the highest TDS with the slower one, right? And we have the lowest TDS actually in the middle, which is a little bit interesting because the fastest doesn't have the lowest TDS, but it does come out tasting really different, right? But in terms of measuring, what we can see here is that the cup number 1 is over 1.4 in TDS, 1.42 to be specific. Cup number 2 is a 1.34, and cup number 3 is actually at 1.32. So it's a little bit kind of up and down. As always, when you measure TDS, zero your refractometer and make sure that everything is on top of it. And if you make this measurement several times, you're going to have slightly different ranges. So we're always looking for ballparks, right? They're not absolutes. But what's the most interesting thing here is the taste, because it's clearly significantly different. Basically, what we have is that cup number 1 extracted quite a lot slower, extracted a little bit higher on TDS, making the flavors quite muddy, the acidity a little bit muted, the mouthfeel a little bit chewy. So not our preferred cup, basically a little bit too strong, right? And a little bit too muddied in terms of flavor. Cup number 2 extracted a little bit more similar to what we do here at April. Even though the TDS is on the higher side, we would recommend being at 1.3, maybe a little bit lower. What we have here is a well-integrated acidity, is a good balance in the flavors. We still probably want a little bit more lighter, vibrant flavor notes in it, but overall it's a pleasant, enjoyable kind of cup. Cup number 3, which again is the fast one and has resulted in a larger portion of bigger particles in the grind sample, is giving us a lot more acidity, quite a lot more punchiness, but not in a way that is balanced and pleasant. So a little bit spiky, a little bit sourish almost in terms of the composition of taste, right? So we would say, based on this little experiment, that grind speed does matter a lot, but then that the preferred or recommended grind speed, number 3, which is what they say in their manual, is actually the best one to go here. But it's for sure something that you can take into consideration, right? So grind speed is something we're gonna keep on playing with. I think overall, this grinder has been really interesting, both as espresso and as filter, right? It's really easy to use. It's, again, a proper build. And you have some variables that are really interesting that you can taste, right? And the fact that you had that larger burst set seems to be benefiting or at least changing the taste of coffee in an interesting way, right? So We would still argue you can make tasty coffee with almost any grinder, but it will still be a different version of it, so to speak, right? And I think this version, or the taste profiles that this grinder brings to the market, is a little bit different from what I've been experiencing myself. So this is quite interesting. We're going to continue to look into it. And as always, we're super interested in any kind of grinders recommendations that you have. Have you used this grinder for filter? What do you think? What do you like? What don't you like? Has anyone found any modified bursts we can use for it? Basically, whatever questions you have, we're always happy to hear, and you're welcome to comment just down below. And as per usual, we take this conversation over to Patreon. So if you want to get a bit more in-depth version of what we're talking about here and ask a little bit more questions, then please sign up. That's why we do it. And with that, we just want to wish you a good day and thank you for watching. We want to give a special thank you to all of our Patreon supporters. It's because of you that we are able to continue to make these videos. And we want you all to feel free to always come with suggestions and ideas on the content that you want to see, because we are doing this for you and because of you. Thank you from all of us here at April.